All right, so first I just wanted to talk about our purpose. So we're kind of in the first step of this purpose today. We want to come to a common understanding of the language in our communication rubric in order to make sure that we produce quality and aligned assignments. Because when we have that common understanding of the language, we can align our assignments better, which then makes our students produce a quality, fully accessible artifact. And once we have that, it leads to more reliable results, more valid results, and in terms that comes out to more accurate measures of student proficiency, which in the end leads to our biggest goal, which is what we all want and what we all work towards, is student success. And those valid assessment results plus our student success ensure our students' ability to communicate. I wanted to share a bit of information from a 2018 study from AAC&U. They surveyed hiring managers and business executives to see their perception of importance for certain skills for college graduates. So I wanted to highlight our two that we're really focusing on today. Ability to effectively orally communicate, that's the top one, and then the ability to communicate effectively in writing. So both business executives and the people that are hiring these students and these college graduates for the jobs have deemed this a very important skill. But then on the flip side, they also did a study, the same study with AAC&U in 2018. They surveyed the same executives and hiring managers to talk about a skills gap. So what you're seeing here is in the kind of like gold color, that's how they perceive that quality as important, or how they perceive that, let me look at my notes again. Yeah, perceived importance. And then in blue, it's the perception of the readiness or the preparedness of students. So we're seeing a gap in the communication for writing and for oral communication. A gap of about 40 points or more. At least that's the perception of employers in 2018. I do have this study, a link to it, which I'll place in the chat later. It's a very interesting read. So our session outcomes today. After you're done with the pre-norming session, you should feel confident in your ability to describe the language in the communication rubric, state the 3 features of the TILT framework, align key assignment instructions with the communication rubric, and explain the logistics of the fall assessment process. And I see that the chat had a couple more items. Is everybody doing okay? Okay, let me quickly go through. So Caroline, yes, I'm going to share the PowerPoint in just a little bit. I have a copy of it. And then I'm also going to share the rubric in just a moment. I'm about to kind of pass the mic in a little bit off to Melissa. So as soon as I do that, that's when I'll start adding some things to the chat. Let me come here. Before I pass it off completely, I just wanted to show you the 3 criteria that are in our communication rubric, just to remind you. We have content and purpose, organization, and then written, oral, and visual tools. And this would be a perfect time to put this in the chat. All right, so then without further ado, Melissa, are you ready?
I think so. If you want to take over letting people in, if we have any later arrivals. Okay, awesome. So, so guys, my job here today is to help us develop as a shared understanding of the terms that we're going to be using to rate artifacts. You know, just a quick nerd note. In rhetoric and discourse studies, we call this a lexis, not a Lexus like the car, but a lexis, L-E-X-I-S. And that's a shared universe of terms and meanings. So it's pretty crucial to establish this baseline so that we all have a clearer picture of the target that the rubrics establish. Exactly. Thank you, Julie. Yeah, I feel like, you know, gesturing. So what we did as a team is that our teaching and learning folks identified places in the rubric where meaning might seem fuzzy or where there might be some potential differences in interpretation. And so then I did some work to clarify them as a rhetoric and discourse person. You know, so in some places the language is super general, and that's why clarification is needed. But in other places, the language is actually kind of specialized, and so I want to help the non-com folks access it a little better. Either way, we need to be working from a place of common definition and understanding. So without further ado, I think let's go ahead and go to the first item on the rubric. There's some terms that that we need to clarify a little bit. And if there's another term or phrase in there that's making your brain glitch and you're like, what does this mean? You know, we can talk about it too. I know we identified some places where we think it needs clarification, but if you guys identify something as we're talking, I think it's fine to have that conversation. So here are the places where we'd like to highlight a little bit. And I'm switching between screens a little bit, so bear with me. Okay, so criteria number one, content and purpose. The student uses relevant content that conveys understanding. That part seems simple enough. But when you go to the highly competent bullet points, and that's where we're going to be focusing most of the content, the comments, because the bullet points are the ideal, right, in that column. The first item says, content is well developed, effectively supported, and appropriate for the audience and purpose of the assignment. You know, this is standard boilerplate Comp 1 language for those of us who teach Comp. But let's break this down a little bit further. So, effective support. You know, Aristotle talked about the means of persuasion as logic, emotion, and reputation or appearance. Surprise, that's what ethos is, if you haven't had that class in a while. But what actually counts as effective or commonly accepted support is really discipline specific. In other words, you are the best judge of what constitutes evidence in your field. That's the good news. The bad news is that when somebody from a discipline outside yours is rating, they may not quite intuit what constitutes effective disciplinary support for you. So if you're concerned that a rater isn't going to be able to intuit what is and what isn't good evidence for this type of assignment, one way that you can help is to spell this out on the prompt. You know, for example, in the prompt for a term paper in my British Lit course, I specify that students should be able to back up their thesis with evidence from the primary literary text, other primary source work like an author's journals or letters, insights gained from scholarly commentary and or historical research. So I have those things, those 4 types of evidence bullet pointed in the prompt. You know, if I was a professor in a different subject, my students were, I don't know, like documenting a lab experiment, my standard for evidence would be completely different, right? So you determine your standard of evidence, and if you think that putting it directly on the prompt is going to help raters who are trying to judge this criterion and whether your students achieved it, do it. It probably won't hurt the students either to see it spelled out again, you know, to reinforce whatever you've said in class or in another spot. So the next part of that sentence, and by the way, does anybody have any questions? Do we want to talk about evidence or what I just said before we continue?
Feel free to unmute yourself if you want to make a comment.
Sure, yeah. What Julie said. So the next part, it's in that very same sentence. I'd like to disambiguate a little bit. Appropriate for audience. As students compose a speech, essay, web text, whatever the artifact is, they should have put some thought into their audience. I mean, this is something we kind of know automatically. In rhetoric and communication, this is sometimes referred to as audience analysis, and we actually have assignments and class lessons sometimes geared toward this. It's the process of determining the values, interests, attitudes, etc., of the intended or projected listeners or readers. So, it's not just enough to know who your audience is. You also want to think a little bit about what's the best way to approach them. What is what will they find appropriate? Yeah. But the truth of the matter is, it doesn't have to be a formal activity. I think we can and should expect students to informally be able to assess who they're speaking to or writing to, and what those people need from them or want from them, at least in a rough way. Therefore, the artifact that you're rating should show evidence that the students have thought about it. The tone, the verbiage, the register of formality that the audience expects, the types of arguments and appeals that matter to the audience. Again, what constitutes effective evidence for that audience, and are you delivering it to them? So all of this should be tailored to an expected audience, be it academic or professional. And again, one way you can help raters with this is, I don't think it's too awkward. Actually describe or mention the ideal audience on your prompt. I've done it before. I mean, it feels a little weird if you've never spelled it out on the prompt. For your audience for this paper, you should imagine da 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 da. But students have told me it's more helpful than I initially realized. So I've kept doing it on a lot of my prompts. So just an idea for so it helps students and raters. Does anybody have anything you want to add to that one?
If we have a project, sometimes I leave the audience open up to the students, but they have to audience, because sometimes you're catering it to, for example, children. Sometimes you might do a project for that. You would talk about it in greater detail, but you might speak to them differently than you would to how you would present a project. But or they might want to present to churches or something like that, and where they have a t-shirt on, but then they do an oral presentation. So sometimes I think for this one, my project, it's probably going to be for the college audience, but making sure that it is clearly stated, because sometimes scientists, we don't effectively clearly communicate. So something that could be understood by a general audience. So sometimes I do have students where they select their own audience in the project. That's
great. Yeah, absolutely. I mean, as long as the students are making it clear for this project, I chose this audience, I think that's really cool to have them articulate it like that. And the thing is, if they're articulating it, and I mean, well, the rater's going to see that anyway, right? Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think that's a great way to give them a chance to demonstrate audience awareness. Pick your own. Any other questions, commentary? I think that's great.
Do you think that most students just intuitively, in most cases, I'm not in communication or written language, I'm in vet tech. But would you say that most students probably think that their audience is the instructor grading their assignment?
I think that's frequently the default that they go to. David Bartholomew has actually done some research about this some time back, and one of the problems with college level writing is that students a lot of times don't quite understand, they don't quite grasp what their audience is for a paper. And in lieu, it's sort of this amorphous, nebulous void that they're screaming out into. And in lieu of, having that audience clearly defined, they do tend to default to, well, the instructor's going to see this, the instructor's going to grade this, I'm writing to Dr. So-and-so. But I mean, as we all know, the different types of work that we're having to do in our classes aren't all geared toward us as the sole intended audience a lot of the time. I have my writing students do these professional portfolios that are geared toward external audiences, because we want them to be able to professionalize and get jobs and show off their communication skills to external audiences and stakeholders in the future. And, that's something that I've found that I have to explicitly talk to them about over and over and over and reinforce. And, eventually that it sticks. I think the portfolio genre in general tends to, like they're going and putting their work in a different place. It tends to reinforce it. But yeah, without that explicit instruction, they do kind of, there's this nebulous question mark that they're writing to, and that a lot of the time by default becomes you. Yeah.
Is that necessarily a bad thing if we're, like, I think particularly for PTE divisions or like vocational, disciplines, I do sort of want them to be thinking about me, rating their paper, because in some ways I do kind of have authority on the topic as well as
Right.
like other, doctors. So is it okay to not really address who the audience is?
I wouldn't say you want to not address it, but I do think it's appropriate to sometimes identify their audience as experts in the field, right? And in your case, the expert in the field is you, and so it's okay if they're writing to the instructor, as long as they see the instructor as a representative member of this bigger discourse community that they are trying to enter. Do you see what I'm saying? It's like my instructor is an expert on this, and so I'm writing to her, but I'm also writing it in a way that any person with a similar level of expertise would understand what I'm saying. I think that's the thing that really helps people professionalize.
Okay, wonderful. That's great. Thank you, Melissa.
Thank you. Any other commentary?
And I'm not an expert in accounting, but for example, I can imagine in Amanda's more intermediate to advanced classes, she does not need her students to explain the basics of profit and loss and ROI,
Right.
etc.
Right, and as long as that audience is clearly delineated either by the instructor or the student, the expectation is I don't have to explain the basics to you. We already both know that we know the basics. Here's the thing that we are talking about, right? Yeah, again, I think everything that everybody's bringing up are actually really good examples of acute audience awareness. I mean, I don't know what you think, Julie, but this all sounds like good audience awareness.
Yeah, I mean, we just wanted to bring it to the forefront because we noticed that we've had discussions in the past about, well, how do students know who the audience is? And so it needs to be part of the discussion when you're preparing them for the assignment.
And, for the record, I also give assignments sometimes where I am the audience. And then I define, what my level of expertise is. And, I talk about how there is a community of rhetoric, composition, English scholars, et cetera, et cetera. And these are the people you're writing to. I think it's okay to spell that out. Yeah. Okay. So I think the last place, and this is a place where the language I think is really particularly slippery, and we need to be very careful. Effective thinking. This, I think we could probably interpret this a number of ways, and left to our own devices, we probably all will. So this is a place where we definitely need some sort of consensus definition. What do we mean when we ask students to demonstrate effective thinking? For the moment, this is the language we have. I mean, I think we could always talk about revising it in the future, but this is what we have. So what do we mean? What's a working definition for this? Critical thinking has its limitations, because at first I looked at it and I was like, well, why don't you just say critical thinking? But then I started thinking about it. It's like, well, effective thinking in some contexts might be heavily critical or analytical in nature, but it might also be creative. So, and maybe this is the conundrum that the original rubric committee was wrestling with. I mean, I don't know. I wasn't in that room. So I can see why they arrived at effective. So with this in mind, I think there are two questions that the raters need to answer, and also that you need to answer as in your own head for yourself as you prepare an item for assessment. The first question is, what logical or creative processes are necessary to respond to this assignment? Different assignments are going to require different processes, either on the logical or the creative side. And then the second question, does the student provide evidence that they've engaged in that process or those processes? As a ratee, if you can spell processes out or even briefly gesture toward them on your key assignment, it'll help the rater. So that's how I would parse that one. I don't know, how do you guys feel about that?
And I just spell it out.
Yeah.
The process for me on my assignment is, number one, identify the issue. I won't go into any more detail than that.
Yeah.
And
you've got
then,
some steps.
Yeah, then look at it from this philosophical perspective. Now look at it from that philosophical perspective. So there you go. You've got some logical processes, and that in itself is going to require some effective or critical thinking.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that works. I mean, you're answering the questions right there. You know, what processes are necessary, and then, you know, the rater can then look and see if the student actually did it. Well, I think I'm going to segue back if there are no other questions or comments on this part of the rubric. I'm going to segue back to my co-presenters.
Thank you, Melissa. So this is going to be our first opportunity for a breakout room. And Julie, Julie, you copied the questions in the chat. Thank you. We're also going to copy these 2 bullet points. We'll give you probably about, let's go with 7 minutes, not 5, not 10. Let's go with 7 minutes. The breakout rooms are not going to be discipline specific for this conversation, but what we'd like you guys to do in your breakout rooms is take the opportunities with your colleagues to discuss the terms for criterion 1, and then how will this language be clearly expressed in your key assignment? Do you think it is? Do you think something needs to be tweaked? But after going through these definitions and hearing these terms, what are your thoughts? And since we placed the PowerPoint in the chat, you can have that pulled up if someone wants to share their screen. All right, welcome back, everyone. Before we move on to criterion 2, do you have did any questions come up in your breakout room, comments, any sort of like aha revelation moments? You never know. Ooh, we have a compliment from Joseph for Josh.
Caroline was explaining something to us that was really awesome, and I'd love it if she can, from a content expertise, say it again. It was about the difference between evidence and supported evidence. What that means in her discipline. Do you mind?
And I think because sometimes students get confused between the analysis part of a paragraph and the evidence part, and they kind of merge the two together, so they're not very specific in how they support their ideas. And Melissa, Rita, everybody, correct me if I'm wrong, but I usually specify that the best evidence is specific evidence, and that evidence is usually like quotes from authorities, statistics, examples from your text, all of the evidence that Melissa also mentioned. And then I specify that they have to analyze that. They have to tell me what that evidence means. They can't just give me evidence and just say, okay, I'm done, there you go. They have to explain its importance and how it proves my ideas. So I think that was what I said. Something.
Yeah, thank you for sharing. Did anyone else have anything to share from their breakout groups?
I had something to share that I actually didn't get to in the breakout room, which is that I usually just give my students the rubric the rubric off from the assessment page and go, here you go. This is what I'm looking for. If you want a really good grade, aim for that competent column.
Yes. Thank you, Rena. I agree. I mean, even from my own perspective, when I was a student, that's so helpful to have these expectations laid out in front of you before you start working on something. Let's see. There's some great comments in the chat talking about detailed in the instructions, explicit directions and explanations. I see a sample. Oh, sorry, my chat's going crazy. Sample of some key assignments would be very helpful. That's awesome. I hope we have a chance to maybe share some in the discipline-specific discussions. Yeah. Oh, or Julie, that's an awesome idea too. Share them in the chat if you have a key assignment that you'd love to share. Okay. I think sounds like we're pretty solid. Oh, sorry.
Okay, I just wanted to say one other thing that Jared brought up that is something to consider, is that the language that we're looking at in this presentation is from level 4 performance level, but that's kind of aspirational performance level. Our students, we hope, aspire to be there at some point, but we may need to look at the, not in this session, but also review the language from the level 2 and the level 3 performance too, because there are some ambiguous words there. So I think that just means, again, be really explicit in your instructions with your students, what you expect.
Thank you, Julie.
So I teach chemistry, and we always encounter with this problem. Oh, I wrote an essay in my English class, but I never wrote a lab report. I don't know how to write it in chemistry. So we give the rubrics instead of giving them, telling them to write the entire formal lab report. I used this criteria, break it down into abstract, introduction. So the students choose one experiment to write about the abstract, and I gave the specific instruction how to write abstract and what you have to include in the abstract and what you have to include in the introduction. So they choose a different experiment to write different parts of the formal lab report. So by the end of the semester, students are comfortable to write the entire lab report. So that was a lifesaver for me, and it is easy to correct, no need to explain a lot.
That's fabulous. It sounds like you're really building them up to be prepared for that lab report.
Yes.
What I like about that example is it actually kind of illustrates the next point we're going to be getting into.
Okay.
Yeah.
You want me to go there?
Yeah.
That's good.
We can talk about why.
It's a perfect transition. I think we're ready to go.
Yeah, thanks for setting us up there. So take it away. Okay. So moving on to this second criterion, organization. The description here in the criteria column says the student uses disciplinary conventions for organizing content and presenting content. I can't read this. It says content. Okay, sorry. I don't have my glasses on and the type was really tiny. I was like, presenting context? That's not what I remember. Presenting content. Okay. So for organizing and presenting content. So disciplinary conventions in general are something we talk about a lot in rhetoric and discourse studies. What a convention is it's simply a feature of a genre. A genre is a type of writing, and the way you can tell things are in a genre are by their conventions. So it's the signs that something's in a genre. So conventions are the features the different specimens or artifacts within the genre share, right? It's like, how do you spot a bird in the wild? How do you know what kind of bird it is? Well, it's got blue feathers and it's got a white tuft on its head. And they're the features that help you identify a thing. For example, romance novels, which we all recognize are a genre of writing, of communication, typically feature a hunky guy or a couple in embrace on the cover. When you look at the writing itself, at least in heterosexual romances, there's a hero and a heroine who meet. There's the meet cute, where they run into each other typically, and there's usually a hilarious misunderstanding or a dramatic run-in, and then they're attracted, but they're kept apart for part of the novel, usually because of a misunderstanding or some pride. And then they reunite at the end for a happily ever after, or at least a happy for now, right? Those are the conventions that define the romance genre. Westerns have cowboys and horses. Science fiction often involves elements. I know, right? Those Hallmark movies, they totally have conventions. We all know what those are. But no, like science fiction has got space travel or computers. We all know what the conventions of typical genres are. And, our disciplinary writing and speaking is no different. If you want to identify your own disciplinary conventions, I think most of us have probably thought about this, but if you want to cement your thinking around it, just think about the hallmarks that make a piece of writing or speaking recognizable as a lab report or a clinical study or a K-12 lesson plan, whatever the common genres are in your field. Chances are you have formatting requirements. There are also organizational and structural choices in the writing itself. If you use the convention of a thesis to declare main idea, the placement of that. First of all, do you use a thesis, or is there some other way you communicate the main idea in this genre? The thesis itself can vary in where it's placed. In some disciplines and classes, it needs to be the first sentence of the first paragraph. In other disciplines, we like to wind. I say we because, frequently in English studies, we like to wind up the introduction by putting the thesis at the end of the introduction. Not always, but frequently. Some disciplines require an abstract before a longer piece of writing, or a cover sheet of some sort. Others don't. Even on the syntactic level, we have conventions. And what I mean by that is like how we actually construct our sentences. And express ourselves on that micro level. In English and journalism courses, for example, we tell people to stay away from the passive voice, like that is bad writing, right? But in the sciences, there's a lot of places where the passive voice is absolutely what you need to steer toward, right? And imagine, I know we keep harping on, you keep using lab reports as an example, but imagine, yeah. Imagine science papers all written in the first person. There may be some particular type of assignment that requires a narrative like that, but in general, yeah, that is not considered good writing in a lot of scientific contexts. So, yeah, we all have disciplinary conventions. They're all specific. And I think the example from chemistry that just got brought up, I tell them, this is what this needs to look like. This is what this needs to look like. And you lay out the different parts. That's great. That's perfect. That is exactly what students need in terms of explicit instruction in disciplinary conventions. So thank you very much for that example. And I think I did have an example from one of my classes. Now, this is not a key assignment at all. This is just a random prompt from one of my classes. But one of the ways you can do it, you can include explicit directions for how to conform to disciplinary conventions. You can also just show them an example. You can give them a sample student paper in this format, or you can refer them out to different projects that they can look at that would be good for them to emulate. And okay, you will be able to link out via the presentation PDF. Okay.
Is it showing right now? I can't remember if I shared my screen or just the document.
I don't see it.
Okay, then
I
that's
just see
my
example
fault.
prompt.
Here we go.
Okay, yeah. So here's and this is not a perfect assignment. In fact, I was telling Amanda yesterday, I was like, oh, I actually see things I would kind of want to change for the next time I use this. But this is something I tend to use whenever I teach literature a little bit like a rhetoric person. It's just what I do. But whenever I teach a lit course, I have people do periodic reading notes. It's a little different genre than like an MLA formatted essay. It doesn't have a thesis. So, that's not the task that I want them to engage in. And so knowing that this is kind of an uncomfortable, different format for them, I've got a bullet point of the expectations, but if you go down, I've actually got an example of this is what your paper needs to look like. Like, it's just got your name, it's just got this title, and here's what the first block needs to look like. It's all summary, and here's what the second block needs to look like. This is the reflection. And so I show them this example, and then I talk them through each piece. So this is another way to lay out disciplinary conventions for them, or assignment conventions if there's a particular convention that you want them to follow. Yeah, does anybody have anything to add, any insights, any more fantastic examples? Okay, then let's go on to the next part. If you look over in the highly competent area, we've already mentioned the conventions, particularly to a specific discipline, including organization, presentation, and stylistic choices. That's what we just went over. The second bullet point says communication is clearly organized around a central theme. The third bullet point, communication components are clearly observable and relate to other components in a well-planned framework. I think this is another place, and it looks like Amanda and Julie thought this was another place as well, where the language could be a little fuzzy. I think we might all interpret the phrase communication components differently. And so let's break down what we're talking about when we say communication components. If you've ever had a writing or speaking class that included a basic introduction to Aristotle's appeals, you probably remember something that looks like this, the rhetorical triangle. But there's another triangle model that we frequently use in both written and speech comm. I think this is something that the speech folks are probably going to recognize when we move over to it. Some people call it the rhetorical triangle as well. You can go ahead and change the slide, Amanda. Or Julie, I can't remember who's running slides. Yeah, but some of us also call this the rhetorical triangle, which I think creates confusion. And in this chart, it's called the rhetorical triangle. Other people just call it the communication triangle. And what it is it's an attempt to map out the elements of any speech or written communication act. And so really what this model is about envisioning the bigger picture. A solid piece of communication is going to account for all the elements in this model. So, so raters should be able to discern a clear and appropriate sense of the speaker, as well as the way in which the student is trying to inhabit it, a clear sense of the topic, as well as the speaker or writer's purpose and message concerning that topic. And of course, as I think we've already discussed, there needs to be a clear sense of audience. So the absolute best pieces are going to contain clear evidence that the student has thought about all of these things, right? And the absolute best pieces will also situate themselves within a broader professional, scholarly, or historical context if the genre allows it. Some genres do, some genres don't. So this part's fantastic, but maybe not as fundamental as the other four. But anyway, yeah, this is a model that if you haven't seen before, or if you haven't seen it since undergrad, it's really helpful. Just look up communication triangle. I would look at, if you're going to Google it that way, if you're going to Google it, Google communication triangle, because rhetorical triangle will get you both models. Aristotle's great, but maybe not for the purposes of this criterion. Yeah, exactly. So yeah, I think that's all I have to say about that. Would other people like to chime in? Maybe the speech comm people might have some additional illumination.
I like what Andrea said in the chat too, audience-centered speaking.
Yes, absolutely. I mean, I think that has everything to do with the last criterion, and I think it's got everything to do with this one too.
And then Edlin, I see your question. I will send out the actual PowerPoint too, so you can have a copy of this visual from the PowerPoint too, not just the PDF that I sent earlier.
Yeah, I just wanted to add that Melissa helped me a while back with some of my assignments that I was giving my students in one of my classes that was a lot of writing. And I just said, you know, sometimes just having a little text box in there in my prompt and having a visual and reminders for the students about what is good communication, right? What isn't allowed, what is a good evidence, supported evidence, right? And something like this, what is to bring awareness of truly who your audience is, who you're writing to, what the subject is, just images for students. I think it just helps them as they're starting those assignments to put then all of this into perspective. I'm not just a content expert right now. I also have to think about good communication skills because they get overwhelmed sometimes in their assignments.
Yes, thank you. Great points. I see some other things in the chat too. Andrea said there's a model for audience-centered speaking where topic, purpose, evidence all centers around the audience. And then Josh said a great way to teach the rhetorical triangle is to show an objective news clip or a protest, or of a protest, excuse me. And
Yeah, and for
ask
those of
students to
you
identify the readers.
Sorry, we're talking over each other. No. Yeah, like for those of you who aren't in rhetoric or English or anything like that, the rhetor, that's another word for speaker or writer. So, yeah.
Okay. I think for now, just in the essence of time, I want to continue these conversations in our breakout rooms and then bring them back to the main room too after everybody's done talking. So I am going to, well, I am going to reshuffle the breakout rooms. I'm sorry. I'm going to make them a little smaller because I know some people were saying they didn't get a chance to talk with everyone. So you're going to be in a different breakout room probably. And let's say about 10 minutes because I know the 7 was a little short last time. So we'll do 10 minutes and yeah, we'll bring everybody back after that 10 minutes and thank you all so much.
By the way, most of the folks in the breakout that I was just in are clamoring for an example. Speaking of, I feel so meta about this, right? It's like I was just talking about, students need to see examples. Instructors need to see examples. So people are very eager to see
key assignments.
About
well,
communication. Yeah.
Awesome. Well, speaking of, Katie Rope, one of our vet tech faculty, she had to take off a little early, but for another meeting, but she posted her key assignment in the chat. Did that get to everyone else or did it just get to me in the main session? If it didn't go to everyone, then I will download it in a moment and send it back out. Because she also really would welcome some feedback.
I need to organize some more of those assignment design sessions. Edlin and I did some, but they were more around e-portfolios last spring. So we need to do some more of those. I think it's time. We have new faculty, and so we'll have to work on getting that together.
Okay.
Yeah, and I think we really need to bring our adjuncts in. At department meeting, a lot of people kind of gave me a blank face when I started talking about key assignments. So I knew right away that I had some work to do in terms of getting our adjuncts access to our key assignments.
Yeah, I think this is another important message to share in this session right now is that, lead faculty and faculty that have been here a while and thought about your key assignments, be sure you're sharing them with adjuncts.
And I reposted Katie's assignment as well. She did say she wanted me to tell everyone that she feels it's kind of a meta assignment because it's an assignment, it's a communication assignment about communication. But like I said, she welcomes feedback and I can post her email later. She said I was totally fine to give that to you. And then I see, Melissa, you already did it. Okay, perfect, thanks. And then Amanda, I see you saying I'd like to be paired up with an English instructor to help make your assignment stellar. That's awesome. I'm sure somebody would be happy. I don't want to speak for anybody, but I mean, I feel like we're all pretty collaborative here.
Yeah,
Melissa,
I don't
do you
mind
want to?
doing those things. Yeah.
Oh, good. And then, I was gonna say, Melissa,
I
do you
never
want to take
mind.
Caroline's question?
Yeah. Caroline had said, how does one assess the speaker or writer component? And, I think, I mean, for me anyway, I mean, I know how I would answer that. I think that we frequently ask students to inhabit a particular role when they are completing an assignment, either as a junior scholar who has conducted at least this small informal piece of research, and so that and that's where concerns about register formality and things like that come in. So it's like, are they inhabiting the role that the assignment is asking them to inhabit? Are they performing the role of a junior scholar well? Or we were talking about an assignment in the breakout that Tori does, not to put Tori on the spot, but that asks students to inhabit a very different role. I don't know if you want to talk about that or not. Tori's muted right now. But she was talking about an assignment that actually, oh, here we are.
Sorry, I had to step away briefly.
Sorry, I didn't mean to put you on the spot when you were like stepping away. Like,
You heard her name and ran across the room.
No, but I don't know how much you heard, but Caroline was asking, how do we assess whether how a student is inhabiting that writer or speaker role? And I was saying, we ask students to assume different roles based on the nature of the assignment, right? And a lot of them from in my classes are, like, you are a junior researcher and an undergraduate researcher in this particular topic. But I gestured toward your assignment as an example of an assignment that requires students to assume a very different role, and I wondered if you wanted to describe and elaborate a little bit.
Thanks. Yeah, the assignment is asking students to talk about their experiences and maybe which side of the dispute they'd take in the Revolutionary War, and they're speaking from the perspective of a small business owner and from a tax collector that's being paid by the British government. So it's diametrically opposed, views more than likely. So I'm asking them to do that, but they can use information from the lecture, they can use information from source material that they've been given in the source material that they've been given, in the supplied documents that I give them. But I need to work on my thing. I need to polish it up. And it needs some help. So I'm looking forward to seeing an example.
Well, it's a pretty cool sounding assignment. I was getting jazzed listening to it. And yeah, I mean, it's a cool sounding assignment, but I mean, like, to me, that's like a perfect example of something where students are being asked to inhabit a very different role than they would as the writer of a research paper or as the speaker in a speech situation. So yeah, I think that's the key, is what role are we asking them to assume, and are they doing so effectively?
And can I also say that supports the multiple perspectives? Students have such a hard time putting themselves in other people's shoes and being able to write from that perspective. And also, I have to laugh at Amanda, who is the British person here. She's
defending the
British tax collector. She's an accountant.
Other thoughts, questions, suggestions, comments? Sorry, just the comments are funny over here in chat.
They are.
I mean, with a lot of these different assignments, there's different stakeholders that, they need to account for. And I feel like this is something that we do on our own, like you speak to different audiences, in different ways. Like you wouldn't, talk to the mayor the same way you might talk to your best friend.
Right.
Knowing what role you're trying to take is important.
Yeah, and one of the things that I always have to stress to my students is don't use text language when talking to me. No LOLs and things like that.
Mm. Yeah, that's a big one that we talk about in rhetoric. There've been all these studies about, about whether things like texting affect, academic work, and what the research is actually surprisingly reassuring on that count. What it suggests is that most students understand the difference between genres and audiences enough to switch registers. I think we do some of this naturally. And that does carry over into academic work. But yeah, there's a few of them that sometimes don't know how to make that jump. And so the real question, or the real issue there is audience awareness, which is what we're trying to get them to develop. So good on you for for spelling that out for the ones who aren't getting it. Well, are we ready to go on to the next criterion? I think it's 11:24.
I think so. Yeah, just to make sure we stay on time.
Okay, but great conversation.
Yes, for sure.
Yeah, and I think this part will go pretty fast because the stuff we're looking at here is a little more self-evident. I think it still merits some discussion, but so yeah, these are pretty familiar terms. So we get down to the third component of written communication on the rubric, and it says tools. The student uses communication tools appropriately and skillfully for academic and professional contexts. And then the breakout bullets in the aspirational column say that the student uses language that skillfully communicates meaning to readers with clarity and fluency. And then it says virtually error-free. The second bullet point says uses a wide variety of sentence structures, excellent word usage, spelling, grammar, and punctuation. So going back to the first bullet point, and sorry, my phone's going off and it's distracting. Okay. Fluency is, I think, a word we need to talk about here. I know that we have automatic associations when we hear the word fluency with second and third and fourth language acquisition. Most of us think of fluency as something that happens in translation or like a level achieved when you're moving back and forth between languages. But it's also about something more fundamental than that. The short definition of fluency is the ability to communicate in a given language or dialect smoothly, clearly, and quickly. So it's a general deftness or adeptness with the chosen language of a paper or project. And within the context of an academic project, this also means communicating in our disciplinary languages smoothly, clearly, and quickly. So if, certainly in a general sense, if students are wielding words or sentence structure awkwardly, this certainly demonstrates poor fluency in terms of, academic writing, and the standard applies regardless of whether English is your first language. You can be a first language speaker and still maybe not be as fluent in academic-ese as you should be. It happens. We've all seen it in writing classes, I know that. But likewise, if students are handling collegiate level vocabulary or disciplinary / specialist language awkwardly or poorly, I think this can also be considered a fluency lapse. So, one thing I'd like to note, yeah, it's possible to adhere to disciplinary conventions in a superficial way and still kind of garble or use the specialized terminology imprecisely. I know you guys have seen this in your classes. Yeah, I still remember reading a paper by somebody who was using the word rhetoric as a verb. And I mean, it was kind of a fun usage, but yeah, I mean, you could tell the student was trying on the word for the first time and attempting to wield it and not quite using it the way it needed to be used. So, I mean, this exploratory use, it was probably an important milestone for her to be trying that word on, but she had not yet achieved the disciplinary fluency that I would have liked to have seen. So yeah, this is all part of that. What were you going to say?
I have a question, please. You have this rubric, and here I'm a statistician, a mathy type, and they're going to write this. I have absolutely no idea whether rhetoric is a verb or a noun. How do you expect me to grade this paper for that rubric?
Mm-hmm.
Rubric.
I think if there is a specific term that you're using in the prompt, I mean, I agree that this is a little bit of a leap for folks sometimes. I think if there's specific terminology, I mean, here's how I approach it when I'm rating is if there's specific terminology that I see the instructor using in the prompt and I see them using it within a context, yeah, I sometimes will even Google the term if I don't know it, and just so I understand what I'm looking at on the student side, and I try to get get at least a working sense of how the word's functioning in that class.
Yeah, I wouldn't know that, if they were using them or their in the right context. Now an English major, would pick that up right away, but I wouldn't pick that up.
Yeah. Do other people have thoughts about this issue?
I've raised my hand, and I have sometimes I do find it difficult to especially I think more towards when we're rating the proficiency of a student later on, right? Like to how much when it's outside, even with the communication rubric, how much of it when it's outside a writing specific course, are we expecting, especially some of our second and third, where English is not their first language. I've been in this country for 20 years and I still, when I'm writing a paper, get stuck and use there and there incorrectly, and I'm a professor, right? So how much do we expect from our students, and where is that fine line? And this is a question I'm asking you, the content expert. I don't have an answer. I'm just asking.
Yeah, I think it takes a lot of humility to pose the question, and I appreciate you guys posing it. And I'm going to try to answer with equal humility. I mean, I do think that this is a place that is tricky for people, and I don't know that I have a perfect answer other than I know the workarounds I try to use when I'm rating.
If I can, oh, sorry.
Yeah, no, go for it. Go for it, John.
Sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt.
No. Go for it.
So, one thing to also, recognize is, looking at the performance levels within the rubric, right? So if you look at the language for what actually meets expectations, something like a there, mix up is not necessarily going to mean that the student does not meet our expectations. And I was looking in the, it looks like Elizabeth from geology, talked about, the resources that we have on campus, something that I always recommend to my students because, I think I'm an okay writer, but I'm not an English major or anything like that, is to use the resources that we have in our, writing assistance center. And, that can help us to make sure that, we got it. And it looks like, someone in the comments says, PAC STEM Center offers writing assistance. So that might help someone who's taking a statistics course, for instance.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
Jim, I could just say as someone who's not mathy, that if I'm reading through an assignment from the sciences or some discipline I'm unfamiliar with, and I come across a sentence where I'm saying, what the hell? Because I don't understand the sentence at all, that's a completely different reaction from going, gee, I don't know what that term means in chemistry. I better go look that up. Right. So I don't know how to explain it. The English people will, but it's an intuitive kind of just don't have a clue what that student is saying at all.
I mean, I think it's, for me, yeah, I mean, it's one thing if I can infer, if I can get from like context clues, that the rest of the sentence makes logical sense. I just don't know what concept to plug into that word.
Right.
That's a very, that signals a very different issue. That signals that I may be unfamiliar with the term. Whereas
Right.
if the student like says like, I have no idea what logical thing they're even trying, like what thought they're even trying to form. Yeah, to me, that's clearly a fluency lapse.
Right.
Yeah. And yeah, I think there's a difference between those two situations when you're rating.
Well,
Yeah.
and I've had students where they don't, and this was even before COVID, where they did not use a single capitalization, or they used all caps to write a paragraph. And so I let them know right away that, you know, they couldn't write like that. Because, I mean, and I don't know how they would have gotten past that point unless they composed on their cell phone or something like that, without, you know, giant things popping up and saying, no, don't do it like this. But I told them to compose it in a Word document and save it, because a lot of my assignments, especially for the semester project, build on each other. And so if they, you know, have a good idea in there, you know, it might continue on into other assignments where they're building on it. So I liked what Ms. Wilkins was talking about, like telling them, this is what this means, you know, the underline, you know, it means it needs a correction. Because, you know, how else would it, you know, without, you know, all the tools, even my phone has spell check. And so without all those tools, how are they still doing it without, you know, referencing that? Another thing is that I try to encourage my students is letting them know that they should not be submitting me their first draft. Like it does take time. And so that's why I do other things like proposals for their project before that, so that they have like, you know, like start sketching out their essay or whatever, the PowerPoint. So there's something before that, so they're not just starting it the night or the week before the assignment is due.
Yeah. Yeah. Those successive drafts sometimes mean a lot. They make a lot of difference. Yeah, I think for me, I mean, one of the things I used to have to do in grad school, I worked in the writing center at Texas A&M. And if you know anything about Texas A&M, which I think most of us do, I mean, big math, science, engineering school, big engineering school. And I had to provide writing feedback on a lot of math and engineering dissertations for other PhD candidates. And it actually became pretty easy to do. I mean, like I did, you know, I would encounter these big long strings of numbers and symbols, and I didn't know what that meant, and I didn't have fluency in those things, and so I wasn't necessarily the audience that was going to catch an error in their in the math portions of things. But if the sentences in between those sections made sense on some logical syntactic scale, you know, I could tell that the person had fluency, at least in that part. And I think that we're sometimes in a similar boat when we're looking at cross-disciplinary rating artifacts. One clue that can help is, you know, whether the student is using a term in the same way that the instructor seems to be using it on the prompt. That does help, but yeah.
Sorry.
No.
Sorry. I also find that my students usually produce better quality writing when they know that it's outward facing. Like, I'm not the only person that is going to see it. For their semester project proposals, I tell them that you're going to be submitting this to a showcase, and, you know, somehow, you know, that in itself is a huge motivator for them. So, you know, that's why, you know, those e-portfolios sound interesting, because, you know, when I say, you know, I'm going to be looking at it versus, you know, another audience, it suddenly, you know, their writing isn't.
Yeah, I think that does. I mean, again, audience awareness, it makes a difference in a lot of ways. Yeah, I think the general sort of grammar, I mean, like all these things, right? Like giving, you know, assigning multiple drafts of things and getting people to go to the writing center. I mean, I've been kind of trying to eyeball the comments as I've been talking. All these things increase at least general scholarly fluency. The parts that aren't specialized language. And, getting back to, I'm backtracking a little bit, something that John said. And that's, there's this idea in English where, there's first order and second order concerns when you go back to edit a paper. And first order concerns are the big priority items, like, is there a main point? Do things make sense? Can I figure out what this person was trying to say? And then second order concerns, those are the more granular sentence level. Do they know the difference between there and there? It's a concern and it affects their ethos, but it isn't quite a concern on the same level as did they communicate their message. And I think understanding that there's first and second level concerns and that you can achieve one level of fluency here even if you don't hit the ideal up here. I think that's helpful, instead of seeing all mistakes as a fatal flaw, one strike and you're out.
And I guess my question is, like, how do we then address that with a lot of our student population where English might not be their first language, right? I mean, I'm only speaking from, again, being someone who did not go to high school here in this country, and I struggled and still find myself sometimes in this area, even now as a college professor, which I do feel, as Julie said, like, I am a communication expert within higher ed. I still struggle sometimes when the spotlight is exactly on my fluency, even in an oral presentation. I think we all can struggle with that. And how do we then address some of our student body, and encourage them to continue to practice this without discouraging them from being writers?
I do think that emphasizing that whole first and second order concern thing can sometimes be reassuring to students. It's like, even if you aren't, even if you're still working on that ideal level of fluency up here, if you're getting meaning across in a clear way, you've achieved some level of fluency. And I think that that's a win. And sometimes reminding them of that helps.
So maybe simplicity. Simplicity is better than.
Yeah. Yes, definitely. And the thing that Caroline just said in the chat, sometimes I'll conference with students and ask them to read their assignment aloud to me. And then after they get done reading their assignment aloud, they're like, wait, that doesn't make sense. That happens to me too. Having them read their work aloud sometimes, does a thing. I feel like we're getting really bogged down in fluency, which is not bad. I'm glad we're having this conversation, but I want to move to the next.
Yeah, I think we're going to have to modify here. So I'm going to let Amanda tell us what we're doing. This is great conversation. I wish we could do this more often. Thanks for everybody. Thanks for the folks in the chat.
Yeah, thank you guys. This has been great.
Thank you, Melissa.
Yes, thank you. Lots of fabulous conversations, and we'll be able to continue those just a little bit longer. So we're going to have to kind of just gloss over sentence structure, unfortunately. But
it's a great slide, though.
Yeah, I was going to say Melissa has a great slide in here.
It'll illustrate it perfectly. There's really not much to be said.
Yeah, this whole presentation is available and all the slides. You can go back over and think about it.
Yeah. So come back to this slide for sure. I know some of you are already reading through it, and I'm so sorry I'm going to have to keep going through it. But come back to this one, because when I read it, I was like, oh, this is great. I'd never seen it before. So on our agenda initially, so we're going to skip this too, we had the review of the TILT framework, and Julie was going to go over some of that. I think in the essence of time, really what we're going to say is that all of these resources are here in the presentation. There's several slides that talk about the TILT framework. Julie, do you want to say something while I'm kind of going through them? Or
I just want to say really briefly, please check this out, because it's a way to help you. The purpose of this is to help you make the instructions in your assignment more clear. So it's a really, really helpful resource. And if you want to talk one-on-one with me about it, let me know. But yes, please check out Purpose Task Criteria.
Yeah, it really helps with the assignment instructions and just making those expectations explicit to students. So while we were talking, hypothetically, I broke everyone up into discipline-specific breakout rooms. Now, there were a couple people that I kind of had to throw you in where I felt you could talk with others. Also, it was really interesting because you all kind of separated yourself out within your disciplines in terms of visual, oral, and written communication. So at first, I thought I was going to have separate rooms for that, but actually, it looks like we're all going to go to our discipline-specific rooms. Please take this time to have conversations about your assignment instructions, share key assignments with each other. We're going to take probably about 10 minutes. I wish I could give you more time, but I want to have time to kind of wrap up and say thank you to everyone. And yeah, I mean, the only thing I was going to ask is, Melissa, I put you with math if you don't mind.
Oh, that's exciting.
Okay.
I'm
All
gonna
right.
get in that room with them and they're gonna be like, oh my God, what did you just say?
I thought based on the comments, they would appreciate you. So I'm going to go ahead and send everyone to those breakout rooms. Thank you all. Yes, okay, it looks like I think almost all, if not all of us are back. Thank you all so much. We have about 5 minutes, so I was just going to wrap up real quick with a thank you and then just a couple reminders for the assessment in the fall. My only reminders are really just timeline reminders. In mid to late September, you're going to get some more information from me about which students are in this that you have that are in the sample, as well as how to submit the artifacts and just some other general information. You'll get a lot more detailed information at that time. Artifacts will be due on the last day of the fall semester, December 16th by 5 p.m. to me. And the instructions will also tell you how to submit those. So you'll have all that when you get the email from me around late September. And then just a quick reminder, if you're a Flex 1 teacher, don't forget to save some of those student artifacts because I know it's easy to forget since Flex 1, you know, you blink an eye and it's over. So just a quick reminder for Flex 1 faculty. And then thank you all for these conversations. I can tell based on everything that was said, our end goal is always student success, and you guys are all clearly passionate about that. So thank you for taking the time to go over the rubric with us today and to help make that quality aligned assignment that will lead to our student success and our reliable assessment practices. That's all from me. Thank you to Melissa. Thank you so much for helping lead these conversations around the rubric. Thank you, Julie, for being there to support me in the chat. And thank you all for such great pedagogical discussions. It's been a fabulous morning.